Okay.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. So here we are. It's Yom HaShoah, which I learned today is also, it's Yom HaShoah v'Gevura. It's also remembering the people who, not just the people who survived the Holocaust, but the bravery of the people who exhibited Gevura, strength to overcome the evil that they were faced with. And I felt that Core Connects Rhode Island has such an amazing opportunity. We have Alice, dear Alice, who lives on the side as a survivor to her story, that we all know the importance of not forgetting. The Jewish people, we go over and over the stories over and over again. It's so important to keep remembering and to keep focused and not forgetting what evil is and how to combat it, and that there are people like Alice and her husband who survived. And so I don't really want to speak very much. I want Alice to be speaking. So she's going to tell us her story. She's going to tell us the story of her husband, and then we'll leave it up for some questions, which I think might be best to be put in the chat. And that way, or maybe not, we'll see how that goes. You know, this is a testament to Alice that you all here. It's a big crowd of people that.
Right down.
You have to remind everybody to mute.
Yeah, I just said that. If everybody could please mute themselves, that would be amazing. We have people literally all over the world on this forum, which is a great thing that Zoom can, as much as we could all go downtown and do a program last night, we can all sit around and listen to Alice, and it's recorded. And we'll look at it and we'll share it.
And it's not so cold here.
It's not so cold here.
It was freezing cold yesterday.
So Alice, I'm going to introduce you to somebody with resilience and courage. So, you know, the cold is nothing, right? You know, all that you have gone through and all that you've been through, your heroism and your compassion and your propensity to continue on and to live again and to raise a family and all that you've done. So I'm going to ask you please to speak, because we really are here to hear your story.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you. Can I go on?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. I always tell the story, I divide my story in two parts. I talk about myself and I talk about my husband. For one reason you will see. We came from a middle-class family. We were at the same time with the same people, but at different places, and how different our lives shaped. I was born in Vienna, Austria. I was the only child, like I said, of a middle-class family. And my father had a business in Vienna and in Sofia, Bulgaria. We traveled as a child back and forth between the business and church by sheer luck. 1938 of March, when Hitler marched into Austria, we were in Sofia. And we never went back, and that's why I survived the Holocaust. Because I always like to tell a little bit about Bulgaria, because not many people know about Bulgaria, and I'll emphasize even the Jewish past. In first century, 863, two monks from Skopje, Cyril and Methodi, were in Greece and studied from the Old Testament. They are the ones that established the Cyrillic alphabet and took a lot of letters from the Hebrew alphabet. You know, Sofia had 50,000 Jews, 48,000 for Sephardim, and 2,000 Ashkenazi Jews. We had absolutely nothing in common, nothing to do. They spoke Latino, we spoke Yiddish. My first encounter with any Sephardim when I was in the ghetto. Until there, we had separate temples, separate rabbis. Even our cemetery in Sofia is one side Ashkenazi, one side Sephardi. I started school there. I started in a German school. Life in Bulgaria was very simple. We who say before Second World War, and maybe was a third country. Sofia was a modern city, but you left Sofia, hardly there was electricity, plumbing in any of the houses. It had only one university, 4 years of college. You wanted to be a doctor, an engineer, you had to leave the country. And of course, when you went to the doctor, you know which foreign language he spoke, you know which medical school he went. Life was simple, but I was very happy there. I adjusted very well. I learned the language. That's not easy. Cyrillic, it's completely different alphabet, just like the Russian and the Serbs. That's the only thing. I learned the alphabet very fast, and I started school there. What was going on 1938, 1930, even 6, 7, 8, 9, even 40? We did not know what was going on in the West. The moment, you know, Austria was annexed to Germany, we were issued already a German passport, and I still see the passport with the big J for Jude, with a swastika on top. And all Jewish women were Sarah. So in the passport, I was Sarah, and my mother was Sarah, and my father was Israel. But it didn't affect us because of the simplicity. There hardly anybody had a radio, a telephone. Oh my God, that was a luxury. So we really didn't know what was going on. But we knew that things were changing in the West because my mother had brothers in Vienna. My father had a sister in Prague. The letters were coming back already. Don't write to me. I'm going on vacation somewhere. So we knew something was going on, but we didn't know exactly. I remember must have been 1940, and it was Yom Kippur. I don't know why I remember that night. It was finishing of Yom Kippur. We were coming out of the temple, and there was a couple came over, and they said they crossed the border illegally and needed somebody to protect them and to help them. And they started to tell us what was going on from the West. So that was the first impression, or knew that something was going on, you know. But Bulgaria, I grew up under a king. The king was King Boris III. And he had German ancestors. Hitler needed Bulgaria for a strategic point, really strategic point, to march the troops through Bulgaria, through the Black Sea, it's ironic, to attack Ukraine, the Russians, you know. After much negotiation, in March of 1941, the German troops marched into Bulgaria, and our life changed like overnight. First of all, we had to report already to the police. My father still lost the business. You know, slowly everything was moving on. Now, I must say that the Wehrmacht were never in charge of us, and I never saw them. It was the Bulgarian police that got orders from the Germans, and they fulfilled them, not in a hurry. First of simplicity, there were no computers, everything had to be written by hand, you know, coming out. Doctors couldn't work in hospitals. Everything was going slow and slow. It was March. I was still at the German school. The swastika was flying already over it. The teachers were coming in with the swastika on the arm with Heil Hitler. They started to make remarks about the Jews. I was the only Jewish girl in the class, and there was a Jewish boy in the class. And I was with kindergarten with these people. But all of a sudden, because I was Jewish, I was different. Nobody wanted to associate with me anymore in recess. It was slow, you know, but it was very heartbreaking if you're 11, 12 years old. Nobody invited me anymore to birthday parties. it's very sad when you're that age and you don't know why, because all of a sudden you're Jewish. We started to give coupons. Slowly, everything was moving very, very slow. I finished school, and I could not get in already into a public school because there was already a quota of 7%. Only 7% of Jewish kids could go into a public school. Me coming from a private school, I couldn't get in. So there was a French Catholic school that accepted the Jewish kids, and that's where I went then. And I must admit, the nuns were very happy, good to me, and we were a class maybe of 40 kids, 20 were Jewish, and I was really, really happy there. But it didn't last too long. We started to have curfew, coupons were given out. Things were slowly, we were scared, we didn't know what tomorrow will bring. But I always say I was still home and I was with my parents. My biggest fear was always to be separated from them, you know. In January, end of January, February, Hitler sent his best envoys, Dempnicker and Hoffman, who did, according to Hitler, a terrific job of eliminating the French Jews, you know, to transport them all out of Paris and out the vicinity. So they sent them to Bulgaria. Hitler wanted 20,000 Jews. He needed them for slave labor. The king agreed to it for the 20,000. But because part of Macedonia and Thrace was annexed, so he rounded up the 12,000 Jews from Skopje and Thrace, and 8,000 he took from the border between Macedonia and Bulgaria, the border. He rounded them up, they rounded them up at night, it was February, and put them in tobacco warehouses. Bulgaria was a big export on tobacco, and we had terrible, severe winters. We had the Siberian winds coming in. I also wanted to say that the Bulgarians was Eastern Orthodox or Greek Orthodox, you know, the church was very much in favor of the Jews. I must admit, and must give him a lot of credit for this. There was a time when the chief rabbi was supposed to be arrested. The church, you know, took him in to protect him from the police. They and some politicians went up to the king and begged them not to send the people because they knew they were going somewhere. After much negotiation between the church, the king, and the politician, 8,000 were released. But the 12,000, I remember exactly, went through Sofia. We collected stuff. We couldn't go to the train station, but we collected food and clothing to that. They went from Sofia by kettle car to the Danube, from the Danube to Vienna. The Gestapo was very angry because they were not good for slave labor. They sent them straight to Treblinka. And out of 12,000, only 196 survived. It was quiet, but we knew that something was going on. Dempnicker and Hoffman was still in Bulgaria, left in Bulgaria. I remember it was a Friday, my last day, I didn't know it would be my last day in school. You know, that's it. The police came. Every time we saw the police, of course, we knew there's some problems. And we got a slip of paper that on May 26th, 7th, we were second, we have to report at 8 o'clock at the train station and only one suitcase. The first transport left Sofia. What they were doing, and history cannot even give us the right answer, is the 25,000 Jews that were in Sofia They wanted to disperse them into small communities and from there transport them to the West, for the West. Was it that the king wanted to buy time from the Germans? We don't know. We really don't know which way they were going. The first transport left on 26, and we were the 27th transport. We didn't know, we really didn't know, are we going in a regular car, a train, or in a kettle car? There was always, we knew already that there's a difference between it. But we got to the train, so police picked us up, I remember, with one suitcase, and we went to the train station. There were a lot of people with the yellow star. We were issued the yellow star, and I always show it because what the difference was, and it was known, the Bulgarian had the smallest star in all Europe. It was a small, like a button. We had to put it on the left side. You know, we had to put it on the left side, where you see how big the other stars were in the West. And it says Jude, it depends, or Zhid, depends where you were, you know. So I always saw that. And because Bulgaria had only 2 trains, one was going north and one was going south. That's it, once a day, once a week, maybe, somehow. So they divided us because some of them had to get off in another station. That's the first and the last time I faced the Gestapo. And I remember my parents telling me, don't make sure they don't know that you speak German. And a Gestapo, you didn't look into their eyes, you had to look down. And I only remember they had one beautiful shiny boots, that's all. But we were scared. They were yelling, they had the German check, you know. They were checking IDs. Now remember, we had German passports. We were not Bulgarian citizens, you know. And again, I always say, like, there was something, another luck, what the British had their bases in Turkey, and the Turks planes were taking off, you know, to bomb, to go over Sofia, although they were bombing Sofia too, towards the west. The sirens went off. They had to get the train off the station as fast as possible. So they didn't check our ID. And we were safe again, you know. I always say that for 3 things that ever happened to me, you know. The train took off and we ended up in a small town, Karnobat, I remember, 60 kilometers from the Turkish border. It was a typical Turkish still little town with a minaret that chimed 3 times a day and a Turkish bath. And you must know, you know, from history, that Bulgaria was 500 years under Ottoman Empire. So the Turks had a big, big influence, you know, on structure, or habits, even the food of them. When we got there, the police didn't know what to do with us. We were the first ones to get there. They emptied the school, and we had completely curfew. We couldn't get out at all. And we had straw mattresses with straw mattresses. And until there were a few more people coming in from Sofia, from the big city, Sofia, I wouldn't say that we were placed like a ghetto. We were not fenced in, you know. There was this very, very small Jewish community, and we were placed in the Jewish homes. We were 3 families from Sofia in one room. The house had no plumbing and no running water, had electricity, but, you know, some had. And we knew exactly our boundary. We had only 2 or 3 streets that we could go. And we only had 1 hour a day, freedom. Mm-hmm. And that 1 hour, I remember my mother would go to look for food. Don't forget, there were no markets and supermarkets, just the peasants came with their goods that we bought at the market. And 11 o'clock, they were already gone. So there were many, many times there was nothing to eat. My job was to go to the well and bring 2 buckets of water so we have some drinking water. Life was tough, was really very tough. First of all, the police always came with new orders, and many times they took even the hour of freedom away because they heard some rumors we did something wrong. One time they even came, we have to pack our suitcase, the trains are waiting for us. The next day they came and said the partisan blocked off the railroads. My mother came down with malaria. I came down with whooping cough, very severe, no doctors, no medical, something. But the worst was always when you're now 13, 14, and there's nothing to eat, and you get up the next day and you don't know if you have anything to eat. And I remember how many times I was hungry, and even if there was a little bit, they left it for me. And it's funny that after all these years, before I go to bed, I have to have something to eat, a little cookie, a little piece of apple, because I don't know, maybe tomorrow I have nothing to eat. Isn't that funny? That's left with me, something. We got less and less coupons. And I remember there were Bulgaria had a lot of gypsies, although you shouldn't say gypsies, they're Romanoid. So my mother, if we got 1 pound of sugar, it was kilo with 1 pound of sugar, they got 2 pounds of sugar. So she traded some of clothing for 1 pound of sugar. And I remember she took one of my best blouses and gave it for 1 pound of sugar. They were very generous, and once a month, in the morning, the women could go to the Turkish bath, and once a month in the afternoon, the men could go to the Turkish bath. It was really tough going. But it was August of 1944, the police came, and they said, every time we saw the police, we were scared. We knew no good news. It was this time they said, we don't have to wear the yellow star, and we don't have to, no more curfew. We don't have to have curfew anymore. Do you know that for days we didn't believe him? We were afraid that it's like it catches. But sure enough, a week later, on 9th of September, 1944, I emphasize 44, very early, the Russians moved in through the Black Sea, transport through Bulgaria to attack the Germans. As you see, I was at that moment, the Russian army was a liberator for me, not today somehow. They didn't stay for long, they were just transit through. But Bulgaria changed right away to, Bulgaria became, the king was kicked out with the queen and everybody, and they turned to Bulgaria to communism then. We returned to Sofia. Sofia was bombed very badly. We lost everything. The house was bombed. And we had to start all over again. There were no more private schools. The communists closed all the private schools. So I finished the last 2 years in a public school, gymnasium. We don't call it high school, we call it a gymnasium. I had lost 2 years of schooling, so they had to tutor me. The two subjects I had to be tutored was in math and chemistry. And I always say I must have had a very good chemistry tutor because I became a chemist later in life. Life was not easy anymore. Now with the other restrictions, with the communists coming in, my father couldn't open his business again. There were a lot of restrictions. After I finished high school, I went back to Vienna to study because I had an uncle who survived Auschwitz, so I had somewhere to go. And the Bulgarian Jews, the 50,000 Jews that were there, were let go. They opened up and almost 45,000 left for Israel. My parents were one of them. So there was no more connection. The last time I went back to Bulgaria was, my parents left in 50, so a few years later, I had no connection. I always think back of my youth in Bulgaria, in spite of the few years that were bad, I always try to think of the good things, In spite of everything, I loved Bulgaria. Even today, I went back many times to Bulgaria with my sons, with my husband to show him where I grew up. In spite it was such a simple country and a very simple life, believe me, life. I loved it. I think I consider myself more Bulgarian than Austrian in certain ways. And if you think really, to a certain point, the 50,000 Jews we all survived in all. But it still had a blemish. Bulgaria never really got the accolade, I think, like Denmark, because it still gave out the 12,000 Jews and only 196 survived. And also nobody could touch Bulgaria. They were a very strong ally of the Russians at that time with the Cold War. I always think back of my life, little story. When I was at the French school still, May 24th is a school holiday. It's the Cyril and Methodi Day, the monk that invented. And we did not have no school, but we had to march in a school parade. We marched on one of the main boulevards. There was one big boulevard there. And in front of the officers' club sat the king and the queen in a red carpet in a throne. We had to slow down and turn our heads to the right. That was a big deal. We saw the king and the queen. And only a few years later, I marched in a parade again. It was May 1st, and we all had to have little red flags with a hammer and sickle. So you see how my life was. I grew up under a king. I went to a dictatorship. I went to the communist part. I lived through the communists and ended up in America.
Alice, can you tell us a little bit about your husband?
Yeah, now I'll tell you a little bit about my husband just to see how different our lives shaped. I will go west. He came from Lodz, Poland. Lodz was the second biggest city after Warsaw. It was called the British Manchester because it was all textile. Okay. Yeah. Textile. The German renamed it Litzmannstadt. September 3rd, 1939, the German marched into Poland. On September 9th, they were in Lodz. And as slow things were going, as fast things were going in Poland. They were issued a big yellow star. The father lost the business. No Jewish kids could go to school. Everything was going fast. In April of 1940, the Lodz Ghetto was established, and there were 20 to 25,000 people going through it, you know. He was 10 years old, and he had to work in a tannery to make belts for the German soldiers. If you worked, you got a loaf of bread for the week, and at noontime, you got a potato soup. You always said there was more potato peels than potato soup. He worked from 8 to 5, and if you were older, you went from 8 to 8. You had to work. And just coincident, his boss in the Lodz Ghetto was in Cranston. He lived in Cranston,
Rhode Island.
Rhode Island, yeah. And he would always say when he saw my husband, "You were lucky. You only had to work until 5 o'clock. I had to work until 8. The severe Polish winters and the malnutrition, people were dying right and left. First, it was his grandparents' parents. He had a 4-year older brother and 6-year older sister. And they stayed together as much they could. And then in August of 44, now that's why I give you the dates, August 44, I was almost liberated. The Lodz Ghetto was started to be eliminated because the Russians were moving in. So he was put on a cattle car. Now, they didn't know where they were going. But when the first cattle cars came back, supposedly they rolled out, "Save yourself, you're going to help," you know, but he didn't know. At that time, now he was 14, the brother 18, and the sister 20. They were on the last transport that left the Lodz Ghetto. And they didn't know where they were going until the train stopped, of course, and there they was. With the German soldiers, the first thing they saw was the big sign, "Arbeit macht frei," which is Arbeit makes you free. It was Auschwitz. But because it was overcrowded, so they went to Birkenau. They shipped them to Birkenau. That was the camp after that. And you must have heard of history. He and the brother stayed together, but the sister was put on the other side with the women. And unfortunately, he never saw his sister again, and never, to the day he died, would find out what happened to her. We never could find her. We tried everything, nothing. Red Cross, no, nothing. We couldn't find what happened to her. So now the brothers were together, and he would always say that he could never, even to his dying day, could never forget the scream and the scream of people and the burning ovens going. And then you were again separated, one light for work and one person not to work, separated. The two brothers were picked to go on one side. He always felt as long as he was with the brother, he was safe. But then the German commandos came, and they picked the brother for labor and not him. And he thought that would be the end. But somehow another German commando came, and they put the two brothers for labor. Before they went out of Auschwitz, he always said they were very kind to them. They gave him a real shower, because the Germans are very clean, you know, in a way. And they gave him the striped uniforms, but they also put the tattoos and number. And he always remembered this when he was standing there for the tattoo, the person said to him, "You go to work, you'll die in a week." So the other Germans said, let him die out of here, doesn't have to. So his number was B for Birkenau, 10308. The brother was 10307. They put him on a cattle car, and they went west to a coal mine. He, because he was short, he didn't have a chance to grow, would go down with the dynamite to explode. But the brother had to drag the heavy coals. There were no elevators, nothing. They were there from November to March 1945. See, I was already back in school and everything. And then they put him on a train because now the Americans were coming in, you know. And he said we stayed on the railroad station because they were bombing so many times, you know, maybe. But then they went through Czechoslovakia or something apart, and all of a sudden somebody threw into the wagons some hot potatoes, you know, from the people. They crossed the border and they went to Mauthausen, which was another one came. There were the 77 step on the quarry to go up, and he said people just gave it up, they couldn't. And then he said, one day a mean German commander separated the two brothers. And I think for him, that was the biggest tragedy. And they put him on a train, and the brother waved his last goodbye to him early. But the train didn't go too far, you know, they were bombed. So they had to walk. And he teamed up with a cousin, even of his, but he couldn't walk anymore. So he had to, they shot him on the spot, you know. Brother. And then on April the 30th, 1945, he woke up and the German soldiers were gone. Whoever could walk or crawl went up to the highway, and it was the 5th American Infantry Division that liberated him. You know, he weighed 51 pounds at liberation. Was in the hospital for a long time, realizing that he was the only survivor of the whole family. Nobody. His mother was one of 6 and the father was one of 5. So there were a lot of cousins, a lot of family, you know, nobody. And after this, he was in a DP camp, you know, and they sent him to America. He was an orphanage in New York, an orphanage in Chicago, and then a foster parents took him to Providence. That's where Providence comes in, you know. He went to Nathaniel Green. He had to catch up with a lot, you know, and he went to Hope High School and finished, you know, even didn't know the language, but he must have picked it up fast. And when it drafted in the Korean War, but he wasn't sent. He was intelligence service because he knew languages. And that's it. That's his life. I just always like to finish it here. You know, you always, even if you ever met him or anybody met him, he always looked very happy and lucky, but deep down there, Auschwitz, all the things that never left him. I only will give you, you know, if I made a potato soup, if there was a peel in there, there we went. I remember when we had this soup in the ghetto, or if one time we won Route 146, I remember it was October, a rainy day, and we had a flat tire, of course, you know. And I don't know why AAA didn't come. So he had to go out and fix the tire, and he came back. He was so cold and shivering. He said, you know, that reminds me of Auschwitz, when we stood for hours in the pouring rain to wait for the commandos to inspect us. So you see, he always had this on him. You know, a survivor never left. They always had this with them. I think I talked enough. If you have a lot of questions, he wrote. Do you want to read it?
Sure, I'll read it.
Yeah.
So, do you want to introduce it?
Yeah, my husband, even that he late in life didn't know the language, lost a lot of schooling, picked up the language very well. And he wrote 3 manuscripts, which he hoped to publish, but of course he passed away very early. So, and one was Romek's Odyssey all his life. One was a play about his sister, even, Bronya. And I only have 2 sentences. the beginning and the end of the book.
Okay, so here it is. It's dedicated to the good people of Providence, Rhode Island, who gathered me in their bosom in the time of my need and made me one of them. From the prophet Ezekiel, Exodus, we have been in the ashes, and the Almighty put on us flesh and bones and let us breathe the air of freedom in the USA and Israel.
The last two sentences.
When my time comes to exit this world, I hope to be less fearful of this parting than others, for I have lived with death's presence near me for a long stretch of my life. I have lived through interesting and unique times. Therefore, do not lament my demise, for I lived twice. So I invite people, if they'd like to unmute themselves and ask Alice any questions you may have. I feel very honored that we have this testimony of a life that we can't imagine. Those of us who are blessed to have not gone through it can't imagine what you went through and what your husband went through. And the testimony is important for us to hear. So thank you, Alice, really. So I'm sure that you have questions. Please feel free to unmute yourself. And Alice is happy to answer any questions you may have. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alice. I have a question about how did you meet your husband?
I always, when I speak in schools, I leave it out so that they should ask a question. I was studying at the University of Graz. I transferred to Graz, later for financial reasons. Vienna was very expensive. My parents were already in Israel. They couldn't support me, and there was a joint that had a house in Graz. It was a little cheap. Things were not as easy even after the war, believe me. And after he got out from the army, he got a GI Bill. The GI Bill was like $110 a month. And he couldn't live on it. He had no family. The foster parents were already one in a home, in a Jewish home. And, he couldn't get back. He was alone. So somebody wrote him, come to Europe, German. He picked up German because of the concentration camps, somehow. It's very cheap. With $110, the dollar was very strong. You can live here a month, and why don't you come and study here? He wanted to study. He wanted to do something. He couldn't leave. He worked in a factory, but he still wanted to be somebody. So he came to Graz, and we were a small Jewish community there, very small. Not many survived from Graz. No, not many survived. Not many Jews survived from Graz. So that's why I met him. That's it. I was almost done with my thesis, and he started chemistry. So we met because of the Jewish community. It was a very small Jewish community there, and not many survived. And they had, unfortunately, there were quite a lot of rich Jews before there. So they had a lot of money, and they built a beautiful, I have been there last time, beautiful synagogue, but there's no Jews.
Did you get married in Graz?
No, Vienna.
Vienna.
Because my uncle was there in Vienna. And then we were supposed to get married in Israel with my parents, but it was Holomoid. So we couldn't. So they made a kiddush. My mother made a kiddush in the temple there. So.
Please feel free to ask questions.
I just want to say thank you for sharing your story. I think it's so amazing, like you said, that the story about Bulgaria is less known than about, let's say, Denmark because of those 12,000. Yeah. But I found it fascinating that the priest worked try and save, because most of the stories out of the Vatican were that they were not helping, they were more supporting the Nazis. Why do you think that is in Bulgaria was so different?
You know, many times, and sometimes you discuss these things, I think because the Bulgarians were 500 years under the Turks, you know, and they were treated miserable. You know, we had one semester in high school that we studied only how, you know, how the Turks were treating the Bulgarians. You wouldn't believe it, you know. They couldn't own property. If there were, we had donkeys in Bulgaria. The transportation was not on horses, on donkeys, you know. If you were on a donkey and a Turk came, you had to get off the donkey and bow to the Turks. They were prosecuted. There were 500 years from 1398 to 1870. Also, they were liberated by the Russian, by Tsar Nikolai II in 1878. So there were 500 years under the Turks. So they know what it means to be prosecuted, you know, somehow. No, we had to study all, I don't remember anymore.
Oh, you remember a lot.
A lot.
Oh, you got a lot of facts up there.
Yeah, I remember we had to study all how they were treated, prosecuted, and the church, you know, the Greek Orthodox, they were imprisoned, you know, with the empire.
Also, Alice, I was curious at the beginning, you said that when the Nazis marched into Austria, your family was in Bulgaria. What were you there on vacation, or did your father have business? Or
no, the business. We had an apartment in Sofia, and we had an apartment in Vienna.
Oh,
yeah.
What kind of business?
But we stayed more in Sofia because I don't remember anymore. I was a child, you know, I was 6 years old, you know. The business in Sofia wasn't doing as well, or doing well and not, you know. So my father, we stayed longer in Sofia than we stayed in Vienna, you know. But when the Nazis marched into Vienna, we still had our apartment there, you know. And so we never went back. You know. We're lucky. And that's what I meant, you know. There was also, which I didn't say, my third one, sometimes I have to say a short story about me. Thank you. A short story about me, and then I give it that there were three things that why I had survived. One is that 1938, when the Nazis marched into Austria, I was in Bulgaria. Second, that the British were coming over and the train had to leave without checking the papers. And the third one also, when the Germans marched in, I have no idea why historians said there were 4,000, among the 50,000 Jews, 4,000 Jews were foreign passports like we were, you know. There were Romanian Jews, there were Polish Jews, there were, Hitler wanted them to be, they have to leave Bulgaria. So if you were a Romanian Jew, you were put on the border, to the Romanian border, you know, the Turkish border and the Turkish border. But there were a lot of German, Austrian, and Polish Jews. They didn't know what to do with them. So they had 3 boats that left Bulgaria, 3. You know, Bulgaria had the Black Sea. So the first boat was overloaded with 800 instead of 400 Jews, and it went down. Oh. And many swam to the border, but many perished. The second boat, was put by just coincidence, by mistake. That supposedly was a mistake. A Russian submarine torpedoed them. The third boat made it eventually through the Bosphorus, and to Israel. Then they were put in jail there, and what was it, locked? No, what was it, where the British put the Jewish people in? They come in.
Cyprus.
Yeah,
Cyprus.
yeah. So, somehow, the point. Even the second boat made it through the Bosphorus, but that had problems with the engine. So they couldn't keep it. The Turks couldn't keep him that long, you know. And so they begged the British that they should go by train to Palestine, and the British wouldn't let them. So that's when they went back, and the Russian torpedoed it. And I wasn't on that boat again. And I don't know why. I really don't know why. I never asked my parents, or they didn't want to tell me, how come we did not go on that boat? Maybe my parents knew somebody and they moved the papers. I don't know, but I was lucky. I wasn't on any of these boats.
Did you have siblings?
No, I was the only child. I was the only child.
May I say something?
Please.
Yeah.
This is Judy, Miss Reed. You can't
Hi.
see you.
All right. Somebody said, oh, you know, the Catholic priests were, and Catholic Church was very against and didn't help, and were somehow complicit. The Pope was an anti-Semite, and the people who some of the people who surrounded him were, some of the people surrounding him were not. There were many ordinary priests, bishops who helped Jews. That was our experience. Also, the nuns helped Jews and hid Jews so that they were able to escape. So it's not completely accurate about the Catholic Church.
I said it that when I was at the Catholic school, the nuns were very, very good to us. We had uniforms, you know. We had black coats with white, you know, collars, you know. I have a picture. And we had a brown beret with a fleur de lis. You'll see it there. And we already wore the yellow star, and you'll see it there. Yeah. There's the nun. See, that was my uniform. We had to.
Where are you in this picture?
Which one are you?
Way up here with the pigtails.
Oh, that's so cute. Right there, under my finger, right there. There's Alice.
Ah, yes, lovely. Beautiful girl.
And so what the nuns did to us, they waited for us at the gate, and we had to take off because our yellow star, you sewed it on, or we could put it on with a safety pin. You know, we could put it on as a safety pin. We all had to take it off because they felt that once we're in the convent or something, we should be all equal. They were very nice, and they made sure when we leave to put it back on. You know,
Alice, I have to amend what I said. I didn't mean that you said that. Somebody made a comment when they were asking a question about the Catholic Church, and I just wanted to put that straight. It wasn't you who said anything about the Catholic Church. Somebody else did.
But yes, the Catholic Church is centralized, and yes, the Pope was anti-Semitic, and they send out, unlike the Jewish religion, they send out their message. There are plenty who resisted and were different, same as today. But the church, as it stands, as a centralized thing, was very much a collaborator.
I said in Rome, and the Pope, he was a big anti-Semite, and the irony was that they tried to make him a saint not so long ago. That Pope. That's your husband. Yes. I remember your husband, Alice, very well.
Thank you.
I think, Fran, maybe you could speak a little bit of your connection with Alice.
So my connection goes very far back with Alice and Ray, and I knew them both as children. My parents are also Holocaust survivors, and were always spoke so dearly and lovingly about Alice and Ray Eichenbaum. And I remember Ray coming to my house on 5th Street many, many times. So, you know, Alice, I want to thank you for that beautiful way that you told us your story. And my concern as a 2nd generation survivor is, how do we educate our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren? Your story, my story gets told because we can still tell it. Who's going to tell it after us?
You know, I had 2 sons, and my husband wasn't the type. I wasn't the type to sit. When they were 15 or 16, I said to him, sit down and tell him your story. Sit down. He couldn't. He just could not tell that. He couldn't. First of all, he couldn't talk in schools for years, you know. But once they came out and said that the Holocaust is a myth, it never appeared. He said, what do you mean? Look at my number, you know. That he started to, but he could not talk to his children. He spoke at classical high school. Both boys would not go to listen to him. They didn't want to hear it. Like they were protecting themselves. They knew. And they knew, I don't know how you felt, but my kids knew that they have no family. You know, my parents went to Israel, my mother died in Israel, and then I brought my father here. And Howard, my older one, was 1.5 years when he died. So there's no grandparents, you know, they grew up without grandparents or something. And I remember the 2 boys had a discussion once. I overheard it. What do you mean? You were lucky. You had a grandfather. And the other one says, but I don't remember him. He was only, I was 1.5 years. But you still had a grandfather. I didn't even have this. Do you see? They wouldn't bring, when they were both in classical, they did not bring anybody from their friends, because to a certain point, had parents that spoke with an accent, and we were not the natives. They wanted to blend in, you know. I remember when Howard, I insisted to give them a Jewish education, and they went to the Hebrew day school, you know. I mean, that was mine doing, you know. When he was there for the first, kindergarten, he started kindergarten with them. Just coincident, his class were all Rhode Island natives. So they had, family. So it was a winter recess, and one said, oh, I went to my grandmother in Florida. I went to my grandfather in Hawaii, you know, everybody. And it came to him. He had nowhere to go. He had no family to go. And, you know, so he says, I lied. I told him I went to my uncle in New York. You know, they grew up. I don't know how you felt, but I know the kids of survivors have a tough time sometimes to adjust to life, to a normal life somehow. And I think the older one had a tough time even when he went to college. But a miracle, he decided to go to Israel for 1.5 years, and that changed him a lot.
Somebody asked a question if you have grandchildren.
Just one. Little girl. A little girl, and she'll be bas mitzvahed in 6 weeks.
What's her name?
Mazel tov.
Ray. She's from Ray. For Ray.
Yeah. Wow.
She's Raya. Ruvain. He was Ruvain.
Thank you.
Yeah. So she's, and she looks like him. She has his blue eyes. He's the only, his blue eyes and his personality.
So Francine, I guess maybe one of the answers that Alice shared is that she speaks the story out so many times in schools, public schools. She said that public schools, like to speak to non-Jewish kids in South Providence, is very powerful. But I think your question is, when you're not here to tell your story,
right?
How do we, the next generation, keep it going?
Alice, have you been recorded through the Shoah project?
Yes. I am recorded with Spielberg's.
Yeah, so,
Yeah,
I
beautiful.
think that's, my
That-
parents were both recorded there, and for years I had the heavy cassette tapes of it, but it's all available now online. You
Yeah.
can't access everything, but you can, for your
Yeah.
family, you can certainly get, but there are many that are publicly available.
I tell the only thing we always we told them, you have to be Jewish. I don't know. I did what I could, and so far, the world, we never know what can happen in the world.
It's happening now. Isn't it?
It's happening now, and we don't know, But I felt to give my kids a very strong Jewish background. That's what I felt, that they should know they're Jews, they should respect. I even had a story when Howard went off to college, and I said to him, we started to tell him, look, we are survivors, we kept the faith, and, you should go out on a date, but, don't even start. Once you start, it's too late. So he had a question, said, if I go out on a date, the names doesn't mean anything. The names doesn't mean anything. I said, you know what you do? You say, oh my God, what time is it? This watch I got for my bar mitzvah. And when she says, what's a bar mitzvah? You go on. So these are that, because I live now in the assisted living, and there's a woman here, their last name is Montgomery, and her son married a Jewish girl, and he converted. And the kids were bar mitzvah and bas mitzvah at the Torah synagogue. So she says, my Jonathan Montgomery was bar mitzvah, so Montgomery doesn't mean it. So that's what I gave him another. When they went off to college, I told them we had a dog, and she was a pedigree, pedigree. And I said, see, she's a pedigree. If she teams up with another pedigree poodle, we'll stay in the line. But if she makes a mistake with another poodle, she's no pedigree anymore. But these are the lectures I gave my kids, And I told them to, to help them to be more tolerant and everything. But why of the Pope, I remember talking to it in a Catholic church a year or two ago. And one of the people there, of course, asked me, what do you think about abortion? Well, I'm not going to touch a subject like this in a Catholic school, church. But the next question was, what do you think that the Pope, did for the Jews, what the Jews? Again, I wouldn't touch that subject there. I said their father did what he could and what he was the best for that. That's it.
Alice, I have two unrelated questions. The first one is, it's Deborah, and I've done some reading about the fact that I'm wondering about your experience with the nuns, and did you have to pray? Do you have to recite Catholic prayers?
Yeah.
Okay.
When the nuns came in, we all had to get up and we had to say that our Father in heaven, I still remember Notre Père aux cieux, I still remember it well. But when the next prayer came, Je vous salue Marie, all the Jewish kids sat down. All the Jewish kids sat down, and they had church services. We didn't have to go. No.
You didn't have to go. Okay.
No, we were too many Jewish kids in the school. No. But we had to get up. The first prayer, Our Father in heaven, we had to. But Je vous salue Marie, all of us sat down. No.
Thank you. The other question I had was, when you returned to Sofia, okay, and I was interested to know, how did the people treat you and the other Jews?
The other Jews?
No. How did the people in Sofia who were there?
Yeah, how were you treated upon your return? Because you would describe that as the restrictions and when the Nazis came, that your friends and your neighbors all of a sudden changed their attitudes toward you. So I was wondering about when you returned later on.
They returned all of a sudden. They were very nice to us, you know. I mean, they felt sorry and they wanted to help, but they couldn't, you know. They came with a lot of explanation and they were very helpful. There were some people, we had nowhere to go, you know, our apartment. One friend of my mother took us in to stay, you know. I can't say anything bad. I really never can say anything bad about the Bulgarian people.
They weren't living in your houses.
Yeah. They were good to us, you know. Besides, I always felt they were good. The Bulgarians were very simple people, and they were good-natured. That's why I was very attached to Bulgaria. I'm still very attached to Bulgaria, you know, because they were good, you know. I mean, the few years how the people treated me as my school people, maybe they had to do it or something. I didn't, then we met again in school, at the public school, you know, when I finished 10th and 12th grade. They were there. I tried to stay away from them. I didn't want to have anything to do with them. And they left me alone. But, you know, we went our own way. But in general, they were happy to help us when we came back, you know, somehow. Because they were simple people. They were not educated or something. So they did what but they were nice. I can't say anything. We were still happy there. Maybe if the communists didn't take over that fast, maybe my parents would have still stayed, but it was hard. He couldn't start the business anymore. It wasn't the same anymore. With the communism's taking over, it was too much tension and too much pressure. And I think my mother didn't want to do it. My parents didn't want to go through it anymore. You know, like all the Jews. They're all settled. The funny, when I went the first time to Israel, when my parents were there, all Jews settled in Jaffa, and they had the movies had the Bulgarian subtitles. There were so many Bulgarians there in Jaffa, and I was there.
So we'll take one more question, I think, and then we'll close out. So if anybody has one last question to ask Alice, or comment, or anything you'd like to say, please do that.
No.
Anybody new? I think
I just want to say thank you.
Please, Betsy.
Absolutely inspiring.
Down here. Bit louder, Betsy, bit louder.
Thank you so much. And it's so regenerating, inspiring to hear you talk. And I had wondered too about Bulgaria because I thought.
I can't hear it.
Can't hear you, Betsy. A bit louder, sorry.
Oh, is this better now?
Yeah, now it's better.
Just wanted to say thank you. It was really, there's something really regenerative about it, confirming, inspiring, and thank you so much for sharing this.
Thank you.
I thought too, when you were just asked about Bulgaria, I had wondered too, because I thought it would be so hard to go back years later. So how you framed going there and what it's meant to you, I think is also really beautiful. That's a place that you were happy to go back to.
I was happy there. I went there about 6 years ago. I was there the last time in Bulgaria, and I flew from Vienna. I had a very good friend that we went to school together, and she arranged that we flew Vienna, the Black Sea, Varna. We stayed there, and I took a plane from Varna to Sofia because my grandmother was with me, and my grandmother is buried in Sofia. So every time I was there, of course, I went to the cemetery right away. And I just couldn't believe it. There's a plane going from Varna to Sofia. it's not the same. That's not the same Sofia anymore. I stayed in the most fancy hotel in Sofia. We had my first time to see a hotel was when I came to America. I never saw an elevator, I remember. I remember the first time my husband took me to New York in an elevator, and there was push buttons to push. Oh, I thought it was tremendous. But I still love that. You know, it's not the same Sofia I remember, you know, somehow. But people are still, to me, there was still, you know, it was still home. Don't forget, I grew up there, you know, somehow. I had my youth there.
So a big thank you. A big thank you to Alice. Everybody's writing in the chat. Thank you. Ways to continue telling the story to support our Holocaust Center in Rhode Island and those around the country. So this is recorded. We'll share this. Alice lives on the East Side. I think you're happy to have visitors.
Oh yeah, anytime.
Continue the story.
I have a lot of pictures and a lot of things from Bulgaria, of course. I love Bulgaria, nothing much from Vienna.
And so thank you for your story. Thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you for helping us remember and to have more of an image of what your life was like with life of your husband and your children. Thank you. We should never forget, and we should always continue to tell these stories because they're important.
Yeah.
So thank you, everybody.
Thank you for listening, and thank you for coming. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen.